to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You could also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein. This is the time of year that I particularly like. Obviously, it's draft season. You know me. This is Christmas time in the spring. My second favorite time of the year, if not the first. But this is when we really start diving into the draft prospects. The first wave of free agency is now gone. The Chargers have obviously brought in some additions, which is going to change kind of the outlook as we go through all of these draft prospect rankings. But I'm particularly excited about this. We get to start with the linebackers today. And this is a very interesting linebacker group. And to assess that with obviously what the Chargers have brought in, coupled with the type of players that they're going to be looking for in this new Jesse Minter defense, it's an interesting class to evaluate in general. And these rankings actually made it tougher than I thought it was going to be, Dan. But before we get into it, how are you, sir?
I'm great. This is, you mentioned it, this is a extremely exciting time for you and I, for Chargers fans. And I think a lot of people may be sleeping on how quickly or how high in the draft this Chargers team may go to linebacker. And we're here to change that because linebacker is a staple of a Jesse Minter defense. You go back and look at what they did in Baltimore. You look at what McDonald did in Baltimore. You look at what they've done at Michigan. Linebacker is a key component of this defense. And there are some components of linebacker that we'll get into that is important. And so Chargers team needs to build up on defense. They've brought in a couple pieces, but there are still some holes there at the linebacker position, and that could get filled in a hurry by some of the physical freaks that are on this list of ours. So I think we should just get into it, Jake. I think first order of business, Chargers made some moves this week. Troy Dye, Denzel Perryman, your newest Los Angeles Chargers linebackers. And we're not going to get into this that much now, but I do find it refreshing to see this coaching staff and front office bringing in positions in free agency that enable them to swing for the big fish at premium positions come draft time. Linebacker, no exception. The Chargers, Eric Hendricks, no more, now gone. Kenneth Murray, no more, now gone. They add in Troy Dye, core special teamers with possible on-field defense upside, and Denzel Perryman. Everyone's staying hydrated now on this team. Denzel Perryman, heat-seeking missile, run defense. Like, that's his thing. Like, you will get knocked off your block by Denzel Perryman. Deion Henley, already on the team. He's the coverage guy. But do we know any idea of what he's going to be other than like a few sample sizes? Not really. So all of that, Jake, I think kind of sets up what this Chargers team is looking for. You know, they have Nick Neiman, they have Deion Henley, they now have Denzel Perryman, they have Troy Dye. But in my opinion, I'll ask this to you. Is that enough? I think the clear answer is no, which is why we're doing this episode. But what is it lacking, which is kind of teeing this whole thing up?
It's lacking coverage. It's lacking coverage ability. I think when you look at what this linebacker stable is now between Henley, Perryman, Neiman, and Dye, you've got core special teamers, and yes, how as athletically gifted as Deion Henley is, and that was obviously shown through his college tape last year.
He's had flashes in coverage, but
yes, he's had flashes in coverage, but in terms of like what you would really need for this, and let's not forget, Dye, Perryman, those are 1-year deals. Denzel Perryman's 32 years old. The Chargers have gone through that kind of aging linebacker situation already, so you probably don't see a long-term project with Denzel Perryman being here. So you need to build this linebacker group up for the future for as long as Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter are going to be coaching this team. So you look at this right now, and as you mentioned, Dan, Perryman is your downfield heat-seeking missile as it relates to the run game. I'm excited to see what Deion Henley is going to be able to do. I think he could probably be a nice balance in between what this linebacker group ends up shaping out to be in terms of what he can do against in coverage, what he can do against the run. I think he can kind of be that middle ground, and I'm excited to see him take this next leap because we didn't get a chance to see much of him last year. He had that injury late in the preseason that kept him out a lot. He was mainly relegated to special teams. Even when he was healthy, he still didn't end up seeing the field that much. So that was unfortunate. So it's really kind of a question mark as it relates to this linebacker group. So what does that tell you? It should tell you that the Chargers are going to prioritize getting a linebacker in this class earlier than expected. Now, a month ago, we wouldn't have said that. This draft class as it relates to the linebackers is not that strong. But there is a handful of guys as it relates to coverage linebackers that proved that they could succeed in college. And this will be interesting just in terms of, I know where Dan and I are going to be as it relates to the top 4 or 5 guys that we have in this list. And obviously everybody's list is different as it relates to the consensus number 1 linebacker in this class. I've seen it be a whole different bunch of answers. It really has. And by all means, for anybody that's watching, feel free, plug it in the chat. Tell us how you would stack rank these linebackers. Remember, Dan and I are going off of what it is that the Chargers need. If we were talking about linebackers in general, this would be a very, very different list, and there would be a number of guys on here that you're probably not going to hear Dan and I talk about it. No disrespect to them or us disregarding them, but this is more flex to what the Chargers are going to need in this Jesse Minter defense.
Yeah, and again, either short-term or long-term, this is best fits for the Chargers at linebacker is what we're going to get into. And to kind of set that one up, Jake, actually, no. Before we set that up, Jake, let's talk about our friends.
Let's pay the bills. Almost missed it, didn't you? Almost missed it. Well, before we almost missed it, wanted to let everybody know about the easiest way to get into some of the sports action out there. It's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite players, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile app. Just pick between 2 and 5 players and fill out your pick'em entry. Get every pick right and take home some cold, hard cash. Use the promo code UNLEASHED and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Going over to Underdog Fantasy today and let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you.
So, Jake, friend of the show, Trevor McHugh, joined us previously and talked all things. He's kind of like the Michigan insider connoisseur, if you will. That's his bread and butter. Knows this Michigan team, the scheme, Jesse Minter, Jim Harbaugh, what the defense would look for, what they need. We had talked to him about this, and then I talked to him about it offline too, about like what this defense looks like with Minter and what they could be looking for in possible linebackers and what they would probably require. And there's a couple pieces that I think Chargers fans should probably kind of remember when it comes to this defense as a whole, and then the linebacking core specifically. Like, number one, the defense is predicated on 2 main things. One, obviously, is having great corners. Like, they have to have good secondary performers for this defense to work. So they clearly don't have the boundary corner right now, but corner secondary success is important. Everything else is about versatility and is about physicality and enabling this team to be kind of a Swiss Army from position, player to player. And specifically for the linebacking core, they have to be versatile in the sense that they need to be able to drop in coverage. They have to be able to click and close inside gaps, shed tackles, blitz the quarterback at times if it's necessary. Clearly, they have to be able to tackle, and they have to be able to stuff the run. Like, those are all things that are important. But for like the inside linebackers, which are most of what we're going to be talking about today, because most will be a 2 linebacker set, it's less about like sheer size. It's more about like play strength and shedding blocks and keeping gap integrity. This is what Trevor had kind of alluded to. That said, though, they need to be able to have enough speed, Trevor was telling me about, to get to sideline and play in coverage. So remember, when we go through these linebackers, yes, size, speed, all the intangibles and the attributes and the qualifications and measurables, like all that stuff's important. But what's most important is versatility, strength, and doing their job. Like, they got to be smart. And so when we go through these linebackers, keep that in mind, because a lot of times people can very easily get And sometimes I struggle with this too, where you get enamored by like the flashes, right? You get enamored by like the heat-seeking missile where he might not get it all the time, but when he's there, he's going to lay the wood. That's the piece that we need to remember with this new team, with this new defense. It's a different type of archetype that this team's looking for. So, Jake, let's just kind of kick this thing off. To start off, what we're going to do is we're going to have a few guys that we like, not necessarily cracking our top 5. We'll kind of go quickly through the first few of linebackers that we'd like, maybe some day 3 guys, maybe some day 2 guys that might not be the greatest fit, but ones we couldn't pass up, really. Then we'll get to the meat and potatoes. Then we'll get to the guys who we see are best fit for this team. Again, best fit, not stack rank top 5 linebackers of the class. We're doing this for the Chargers specifically. Before we get to those, Jake, anything else to set the stage?
I think we've covered it. But I'm sure some people are going to forget that we mentioned something in here and be like, what? What are you ranking that guy above that guy for?
Probably.
Keep in mind, we may have to say it at least 3 or 4 more times in the duration of the show. These are best fits for the Chargers based off of what they are currently lacking in the current linebacker room.
So let's kick it off. Going from Ann Arbor to Los Angeles could be a possibility for a 1 Michael Barrett. Now, Michigan native. I think he played. I think he's a 6-year player for Michigan. Has done better these last couple of years. Not the tallest dude. Like he's 5'11", but still girthy. Smaller hands, long arms, which is good. But what he lacks in like overall height, he brings in terms of pressure, motor, effort. You know, I wouldn't necessarily depend on him to be like the volume sack guy, but he's the one that can kind of cause chaos inside. Like he's probably like I don't want to say this incorrectly, but he's like a poor man's version of some of the guys we're going to be talking about in our top 5. But his pass rushing is kind of what he's great at. And again, like 230 plus being 5'11", like the guy has some meat on him. Average in coverage, you know, average run defender. But again, like he kind of brings motor, physicality, effort, and again, like he can lay the wood. Like he had a 92.3 pass rush grade this past season, according to PFF. Barrett's a guy I like, Jake. And again, like you can't discredit the fact that he's already familiar with the scheme. He's a day 3 guy for sure, for me. But familiarity, trust, they know what they've seen in him. I could totally see him going from Michigan to the Chargers on day 3.
You got to love that familiarity. Now, again, the only pushback I would give is just from the standpoint that I think that the Chargers are going to prioritize linebacker before day 3 ends up showing up. But you got to take in the Michigan familiarity here, obviously with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter. And Michael Barrett will not be the only Michigan linebacker that we will be talking about on this show for obvious reasons. But I feel like if hypothetically, if the Chargers had already had 2 starting linebackers that you knew were going to fit into this defense immediately outside of the moves that they just made, I think Michael Barrett would have made a lot of sense for a later day choice.
Yeah, I can see that. Again, it depends on what they're looking for. Like if they want to round this thing out for special teams to take a flyer, like I think he'd be solid because he would bring so much upside if that's what you're looking for to start out with. Next one, Jake. This is your guy.
You talk about an athletic freak, Dan. Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky, 6'1", 237, solid athleticism. In high school, Trevin Wallace actually played linebacker, quarterback, and wide receiver in high school. So his athleticism definitely shows up. Ran a 4.52 at the combine. Actually ended up finishing in the 96th percentile in the athletic composite. I think it was just behind Dallas Turner. Was the only person in terms of those scores go that he was actually behind. He was just a freak. Still definitely raw in some regards to his game that need to be developed more, but he just has rare explosiveness, good long speed, plays strong against the run, tackles very well in open field. His game in Georgia this past year, or his game against Georgia this past year, definitely highlighted that. Finds the ball naturally. All in all, if you want to get faster on defense, Wallace can bring that speed. And from what we know, Wallace, I believe, I can't remember if it was at the Combine or since then, but he has actually had a private meeting with the Chargers since then. So you want speed, you want coverage ability. I just think that Trevin Wallace is just a fun watch. And if you're looking to get downhill faster, yeah, Trevin Wallace can do that.
Next one. Again, it's kind of like our honorable mentions before we get to our top fives, if you will. Next one for me, Jake. Actually, scratch that. Next one's yours.
Aha. So Tyron Hopper, Missouri. Again, another fun player to watch. He actually spent his first 3 years primarily as a backup when he was in Florida. And when he transferred to Missouri, immediately got starter reps, became the captain of the team down there, actually finished his career from Missouri with 133 tackles, 20 for loss, 8 pass breakups, and 5.5 sacks. And he could cover a lot of ground in pursuit. He actually said in an interview that he loves playing man coverage. Dan, this is another one. High school, he played safety and cornerback in high school. So it makes sense from the standpoint of just loving to cover guys. So it makes it, it seems like it's translated well to his game. But he's got good athletic range, should be able to translate that well over time as he gets into the NFL. He ended up suffering an ankle sprain late in the year that had him miss some time. But again, this is another one where you just put on the tape and you just see a guy flying around the field. So much kind of in the similar mold as Trevin Wallace. He's just a fun guy to watch. I like what I see from him. You from the standpoint of coverage ability goes, just having that safety / cornerback background, it's a good thing to have in both man and zone coverage. And from everything that we've talked about as it relates to Jesse Minter's defense, I think that he can have some of those transferable skills that you'd want to see.
Yeah, you're high on him. Next guy on my list, Jake, now that it's actually my turn, is a Penn State guy, Curtis Jacobs. Now, it's funny. You look at kind of the archetypes of the Jesse Minter or Baltimore linebackers. It's basically, are you 6 foot? Are you roughly 233-ish pounds? If you're that, you're going to be on the high list for this Chargers team. Now, go look at Patrick Queen. Go look at Roquan Smith. Look what they look like. Look at their measurables compared to some of these guys that we're talking about. 10 1/4 hands, big hands. 4.58 40 for Curtis Jacobs, by the way. 31.5-inch arms. And what I like about Curtis Jacobs, again, day 3 guy setting the stage immediately. He's not a great run defender. He's average in coverage. He's average when it comes to missed tackles, I would say. About a 12.5% missed tackle rate, which isn't great, but it's not terrible. But he looks and measures the part, man. Like, he sheds blocks really well. This would be one where I would want Coach Navarro Bowman to, like, just get his hands on him. He has really, really good technique. I think he wins more on, like, motor than, like, crazy athleticism or, like, awareness. He tested really good at the Combine, actually. This would be a depth piece for me. Like, his pass rush grade was way up there in the green. I think scheme-wise is what I like about him. 4.58 40, 1.59 10-yard split, which is good. 10.4 broad jump, which, like, I'll take. Not necessarily as much like production, but I think he just brings kind of the I don't know, like the heat-seeking missile type. Like, he would be in the same archetype of a Denzel Perryman. Again, Denzel Perryman was a 2nd-round draft pick. Like, he's not the same ceiling, but that style of play and the motor, I think, is what entices me about Curtis Jacobs. Are there any other kind of honorable mentions, guys that we don't have on this list that you think would be up there for us?
Again, if we were just talking overall linebacker class in general, and not necessarily leaning so much into this coverage linebacker due to what's needed for this linebacker group this year in Jesse Minter's defense. Aaron Casey out of Indiana has always been a guy that I have been extremely high on. You talked about just a very physical player, Dan, as you were saying, in terms of the similar to the mold of Denzel Perryman, just in terms of how he plays, shoots well through the gap, plays the run very, very well. He probably would have been up in this list as well if we were just talking about linebackers overall. JT Bertrand out of Notre Dame, he would probably be up there as well if he was a little bit stronger in coverage. But overall, I like what I've seen from him on his tape as a linebacker from Notre Dame. And
Jeremiah Trotter is probably another one.
Jeremiah Trotter is actually on my list. He's up there for me.
Ooh. See, this is what happens when you don't go through your list before the show.
I mean, in fairness, he's actually next. So that's where I actually have him.
How about that for a cue? Let's tee this one up. Jake, let's talk about your next guy on the list. Again, now we're getting towards, we're leaving remember, versatility. Guys that can do multiple things well, be used in different deployments. That's kind of what this Chargers team is most likely going to be looking for. We're kind of shying away from the one-trick ponies, getting more towards the jack of all trades or king of all trades, maybe ace of all trades, some of which may actually be ace of all trades. Next up, Jake, this is your guy. And and maybe I'm wrong, but Jeremiah Trotter feels like a Denzel Perryman.
I could totally get that, especially when you're looking at Jeremiah Trotter's size, 6 foot, 230.
Looks the part, yeah.
Yes. I mean, if we were talking about Jeremiah Trotter at 6'3", 6'4", this could be considerably different in terms of where he would rank. He's undersized, but he's a very, very smart linebacker. Terrific instincts. His vision is arguably his best trait that he has. Terrific when he's dropping into coverage, can find the ball and move through traffic very, very well to get there. Plays with a good motor and the type of competitor that you really want someone who's going to be playing that linebacker position for. Again, his measurables are the biggest weakness. And because of that, where you see that flaw on tape is that he can get taken out of a play very easily by bigger blockers, opposing offensive linemen, whatever it is. So the size and the measurables, those are obviously his biggest downfall. If he was, came in around 6'3", 6'4", he'd probably be up much higher on this list. But he's got the NFL pedigree. He has those natural instincts, vision, high IQ as a player. I like what I see from him on tape. And in terms of where I rank him in this list, I think it's fair. Out of the big 5 linebackers that are in this class, yes, he's at number 5 for me. But I still like what I see from him on tape. I'd be interested to see how he's going to translate that and how he's going to make up for that size and skill set at the next level as it relates to his high IQ play. But I still really like what I see from Jeremiah Trotter on tape.
Yeah, I mean, Lance Zierlein has his NFL comparison to Nick Bolton, which Chargers fans know Nick Bolton very well. Now, I don't know if I see much of Nick Bolton, but Lance Zierlein is like one of the gods when it comes to this kind of stuff. So, I like him. I think the thing that concerns me is while he's versatile, he seems like kind of a liability in the sideline to sideline coverage. He has good grades in pass rush, in run defense, in coverage. But I think in the NFL, it's a different animal from a pass rushing or from a coverage perspective. And that concerns me. His missed tackle percentage is up there. It's 16+%. And from a coverage, you mentioned kind of from a run defense side, from a run defense side, one thing that is alarming for me, the depth of run tackle, according to PFF, 2.2, he's way on the left side, orange, closer to red in terms of and that just shows you what his instincts are like. And so great player. I like him, but there are things on there that are red flags that have him outside of my top 5. I think he'd be a really good linebacker for other schemes. I just don't know if he would be a linebacker for the Jesse Minter scheme.
Makes sense.
All right. We're getting to the big boys, Jake. Next on our list, and I think, Jake, you and I both have this man has high on our list. We'll get through our top fives here at the end.
Again, I don't know Dan's list. Dan doesn't know mine. So I know who he's high on. I just don't know where he's placing him. And I have no idea who his number 4 is going to be.
Yes. So I think a guy that we have equally enjoyed, in my opinion. See, this is so tough for me, Jake, because there are 5 guys here that I like. And I'm honestly kind of going through this in real time to determine like how I want to determine this.
This is where it actually got tough to rank, especially if you're just looking specifically at these 4 guys' ability in coverage. It's very good. It's very good. Production is very good. Freak athleticism is good.
I might.
So I love this contemplation in the middle of the episode.
Honestly, man, right off the bat. JT. No. Okay. Michael Barrett, I think, is going to be my 5. And again, he's not the 5th best linebacker. And he's not better at a linebacker than Jeremiah Trotter. But I think from a scheme fit and what this Chargers team needs, I'm putting a high emphasis on kind of the familiarity and what this team can do with a guy like that. Like, again, he's not going to be your linebacker 1 or 2, possibly, but how it would fit the versatility chess piece type players that this Chargers team needs, Michael Barrett would be it for me. I think that's my number 5.
Dan Wolkenstein leaning heavy into the Michigan in his top 5 for his linebacker class.
And I think it's because of how important that is for teams, or for this team specifically. Like when you've seen how much they prioritize like guys that they've played for, guys that they've played with, coaches that they've had in the past, players that they've had in the past, like all of that, like it's a relationship type thing. And if you can reduce the variables and the risks, like I think that's a thing that this team might be leaning into. I believe the guy that I'm going to say is my number 4, because you did 5, I did 5. My number 4 is going to be Cedric Gray.
I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. This was the one that I was wondering where you were going to place. I know you were extremely high on Cedric Gray. But as I started going through this and I was looking at the names, I'm like, I can't put Cedric Gray any higher than this. And I'm happy to know that you did the same.
So prototype, like he is a Jesse Minter linebacker through and through, looking at the measurables. 6'1", 234. Remember, we talked about what the Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen's guy look like. This is basically them. Good hands, good arms, 4.64, a little, I don't want to say slower, but slower than some of the freak athletes that we have above him. But Cedric Gray, like, really good pursuit linebacker, really good downhill defender. He's really good in coverage. He diagnoses really well. Kind of a do-it-all linebacker. Like, he's okay in run defense, but excellent in coverage and passing downs. The missed tackle rate, I think this is why I don't have him higher. Why other guys went above him. The missed tackle rate, 14.6%. I'd like to see that number better. He's probably more of a pursuit style, weak side linebacker, just because I don't think run defense is his forte, but allow him to chase. And I think he's rock solid. I love his motor. I think he's just a solid linebacker that would fit really, really well in this defense.
I'm wondering, Dan, that missed tackle rate. Give me that missed tackle rate percentage again.
14.6% in 2023.
Well, because Cedric Gray has just had a ridiculous 3 years of production at North Carolina. The last 2 years alone, he had 266 tackles and 23 tackles for loss. So I'm wondering if this is like one of those situations, because the production is so high that he had more opportunities to miss in that circumstance. Sure. But he was still doing so much in that defense. As Dan mentioned, he's very good when dropping into coverage. Good anticipation, reads the eyes of the quarterback very well. Can go up and get the ball when it's being thrown across the field. You see that it just looks naturally for him when going up to get the ball when he's dropping in coverage like that. Again, really high IQ, had some good plays at the Senior Bowl, has the motor to go sideline to sideline and finish tackles in the open field. And as Dan said, he's all right against the run, but where he really makes his bread and butter is in coverage. And obviously, with production like that over the last 3 years, it's stellar. So, Dan, props to you for for coming down just a little bit, albeit this is not a knock against Cedric Gray. This is still holding him in high regard, but it was really tough. Again, as we get into these top four, it was really tough to figure out where we stack rank these guys.
I made a last minute edit live on the fly for this one today, so I apologize if that took a little bit to get out of me. Jake, who is your, and I'm curious, this is where I'm very curious how our top threes align. I think we have the same three.
We could.
I think, just given who we haven't talked about yet. But I'm wondering if it's aligned. Who is your number three?
It's Junior Colson out of Michigan. Easy for me. Mm-hmm. And again, it was when you look at the things that rank the other two players in this list above him, it's more so from an intangible standpoint and a physical standpoint. But Junior Colson from Michigan obviously makes sense for the Chargers in so many different facets. Obviously, the familiarity with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter. 36 game starter, Dan, led the Michigan defense with 93 tackles in 2023. Very just well-rounded linebacker. Tightens up the chin strap and just comes to hit. He's the guy that when they say don't stand on the track when the train's coming through type of player, like that's how he's going to get you. Sees the field very well when dropping into coverage, explodes through traffic to get the ball carrier. Again, another very high IQ linebacker. Doesn't allow any pre-snap motion to take him out of a play. Physically and mentally tough. He played through some injuries during his time in Michigan, so you know that he's just a football player. So I really like everything that I see out of Junior Colson. I would absolutely love it if the Chargers ended up drafting him. I think it would just make a lot of sense. Still have the over-under line at 1.5. And actually, Junior Colson is actually one of the ones that I would rate the highest out of the Michigan players to end up on this Chargers team for obvious reasons. Outside of stats alone, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I like Junior Colson, and honestly, he would have been number 2 until the combine, and then it shifted a bit. But Junior Colson, for me, you mentioned like the IQ. Like I think he's one of the smartest linebackers, and that's probably what Jesse Minter and company like are looking for most as a linebacker. Like obviously you want physicality, you want versatility, but like you got to be in the right position, right? Like he's not necessarily the best pass rusher. Like I'd say he's a little below average. Maybe he's pure pass rushing, but like I don't think Jesse Minter wants to necessarily send his linebackers if they don't have to. And so from a run defense perspective, from a coverage perspective, from a missed tackle rate, he is elite. 4.7% missed tackle rate. That is way in the elite blue category, according to PFF. Again, we're talking like 12, 13, 14% with guys we were looking at before. 4.7. Okay. Familiar with the Michigan scheme, familiar with Jesse Minter. He's not like the most athletic, but you said his IQ. He's just cerebral, man. Like he's just smart. He's versatile. And I think that's what the defense predicates itself on. And given that they need sure tackling, all of that is, I think, why Junior Colson, there's a couple guys that I think are more likely than others. And you mentioned it, like Roman Wilson, Junior Colson, Cornelius, I forget his last name, the receiver. Like all three of those guys, I could see being Michigan like favorites to come to Jim Harbaugh. Given kind of the gap and kind of the long-term lens of the linebacking core, Junior Colson like might be a long-term solution. Where do you see him going? Like what round?
Just like round projection?
Because realistically, I don't think there's a single linebacker that's going in the first round.
No.
And we'll get to the other two. One's probably going to go a little bit before the other, although if it was me, I think go a different direction.
I say he's gone day 2, whether that's rounds 2 or 3. He's a day 2 linebacker. Yes.
I think I'm guessing he's going to be end of.
But to your point, Dan, it's interesting considering the fact that there's not going to be any linebackers that are going to go in round one.
Maybe.
What necessarily is their ceiling once you start getting into round two?
Yeah, my guess is I think he's going to be an early round 3 guy. I think he's going to be early round 3. That's value for me. Okay, Jake, I'm going to let you start this one off then. Who is your number 2?
This was so tough for me. This was a mental war that I was having with myself throughout the day today when we were talking about how we're going to stack rank these. And
oh man, I'm nervous.
This is so razor thin on a lot of different levels. And when we're talking about what's going to be the difference between 1 and 2, it really isn't that much of a difference. But when you start digging into it, and literally the only differences between it's not a lack in coverage ability. It's not a lack of production between both of these two guys. It literally is just other intangibles when you look at the big picture of things. Payton Wilson ended up as my number 2.
Okay.
Payton Wilson ended up as my number 2. The crazy thing about Payton Wilson, and again, it pains me to say that because Payton Wilson has first round traits as a linebacker. An absolute freak at 6'4" and 233 pounds. But he battled injuries throughout majority of his college career. Issues with his shoulder, issues with his knees. But when he was healthy, like he was in 2023, he could easily be considered the top linebacker in this class. 138 tackles and 6 sacks, finished first among linebackers with 26 coverage stops. His range is arguably the best of anybody in this entire class. His burst, his pursuit to the football are stellar, evidenced by his 4.4 340 that he ran at the combine.
Dude.
More of a slender build, but obviously just that comes with the 6'4" frame. And the other aspect of it is when he gets into the league, Dan, he's going to be 24 years old. So he's one of the older prospects in this draft. But outside of that, if you just look at Payton Wilson, the player, there is an argument to be made, and a very good one at that he should be the first linebacker off the board in this class. But it was because of those intangible reasons, just from an injury history. He's going to be on the older side when he gets into the league. That's the only reasons why I actually dropped him to number 2.
Yeah, and again, you could look at the age as a positive or negative, depending on which way you want to spin it. Ideally, you'd like him to be younger, but if he's if you're getting let's call it a more veteran player as a rookie, you'll take it. And also, realistically, 24, let's say he plays with 32, like Denzel Perryman, or 33, that's still 9 years in the league. That is way out there. Let's worry about the first 4 years of the contract before we worry about what it's going to be like in year 9. Let's pump the brakes. For linebackers specifically, again, if it's quarterback, different story. But linebacker, I don't worry about that. You worry about the first contract, make it happen, and then the rest you figure it out. So Payton Wilson was probably 3 or 4 for me prior to the combine. And then when
that changed a lot, didn't it?
And then when you see that 4.43 number and the size, 6'4", 233, 6'4" is tall for a linebacker, especially in this scheme. It just you don't see that very often. And while he is athletic as all hell, he's very athletic, the depth of run tackle, he kind of gets washed at times, and it's a little below average, 3.3. But everything else, again, we're kind of splitting hairs here, but everything else, Payton Wilson is so good. He's a freak athlete. He has elite run defense grade. I think it's 93.7, which is insane. Coverage grade, not too far off, 90.4. Pass rush grade, all 3 of these things, all 4 for including his tackle, all in the blue, all elite. He has a bit smaller hands and shorter arms for his size, but those, what would be typical issues, don't usually show up on the film. I'm maybe projecting a bit here. That could be an issue. but I just don't know if like the reason I have him at 2, and honestly, I was close to having him at 3. Like his athleticism is what brought him to 2, but I think the strength is what I'm still questioning. And like the physicality, I think at times, like the guy's shredded, he's ripped, right? Like I'm not sitting here and saying he's weak, but like the compact Mack truck type, the physical, like that is not him. It's a different breed, which isn't bad, but I just don't know if that aligns to this defense. But he's so athletically gifted and he's so good that I'm just banking on all of that to kind of shine through.
You know, before everybody starts clamoring to be for the whole age thing, which I totally get. It's age coupled with the injuries that gets me. Because I know Deion Henley, as it stands right now, today, or not, he's 24 years old as it stands currently right now. It was drafted when he was 23. Again, different regime, but.
And again, they're honestly, we're going to give them both about the same
starting point. I'm not taking anything away from Payton Wilson's play. I would actually love to see Payton. Like, think about this, Dan. Think about how athletic, freakish your linebacking duo would be if it had Payton Wilson and Deion Henley. I mean, that is a pairing of legit athleticism. That would be something to think about just from the standpoint of putting those two guys next to each other. Again, Payton Wilson has first-round linebacker traits, but there are just some intangibles from the standpoint of him being number 2, but it's not too far from number 1. Honestly, I had an internal battle with myself that I thought that Payton Wilson was going to be surefire ranked my number 1 guy, and as I just dug into it a little bit more, that's the only reasons about why I brought him down. Dan, let's talk about number 1.
Now, this is the one that as soon as I started watching the linebacking core and I started seeing, and this is like, I want to say it was like maybe 6 weeks ago, Edgerrin Cooper was lower than where he is now. And at the time, everybody was saying like, dude, Payton Wilson is like head and shoulders linebacker 1. And I'm watching this and I'm like, I don't know if we're watching different tapes here, but I argue he's better. Worst case, pick your flavor, but definitely not worse, in my opinion. And then you couple that with like the ideal size, 6'2", 230. You couple that with the long arm, the measurables, the 34-inch arms. Again, he has like 2+ inches more longer arms than Payton Wilson, and he's shorter than him.
Which is wild.
4'5", 140, 9 3/4 inch hands. Like all of the measurables just stack up perfectly to what this team has looked for, or what this defense under Minter or Mike McDonald has looked for in linebackers. Edgerrin Cooper is, in my opinion, it's like Edgerrin Cooper, there's a gap. Payton Wilson, there's a gap. Payton Wilson and Junior Colson, gap, and then the rest. Edgerrin Cooper, insane instinct. He's a physical freak. Sideline to sideline, check, check, check. Insane pursuit angles, has that on lock, sheds, avoids, blocks well. The guy can absolutely blitz and lay the hammer on anyone. He can drop in coverage and he can rush the pass. He's everything that Jesse Minter's defense would look for. Now, even though he has long arms, Payton Wilson is a better tackler from a pure statistics perspective. Like he still has like an average missed tackle rate of about 12%, but off the charts elite, 96.4 pass rush grade according to PFF. these are both wrong. 86.4 and 87.6 pass rush and run defense grades, and 85.5 coverage grades. Elite, like breaking the scale on the right side for all of those. Edgerrin Cooper, like the problem I have though, Jake, is like I love Edgerrin Cooper. But like where they're going to have to get him, I don't know if I love him that much compared to what the needs of this team are.
I think that's what we're going to have to end up talking about once we finish this, is because there's an argument to be had that the top 3 linebackers that we just spoke of could be taken in the second round of the draft. And again, you go back to Edgerrin Cooper just from a standpoint of versatile chess piece, of inserting him into a defense. He can attack and cover from different places all over the field. Good example of that, go back and watch his game against Alabama and see where he is on the field during that game. Has that change in direction and long speed necessary when dropping into coverage. Now, where I think that he's going to need some areas of improvement, because short coverage, keeping things in front of him, he's great at that. I think if he gets put in a situation where it's anything that's further downfield, hopefully he's going to be in a position to make a play and, come away with that much improved once he gets to the NFL level. And then he's had a meeting with the Chargers since the NFL Combine. So there is some familiarity there. Now, to your point, where would the Chargers have to grab him? I would say he doesn't make it out of the second round.
I don't think it is either.
And this is where it now gets into the conundrum of the Chargers trading down and acquiring more draft capital, because there is a plenty of things that they need in the second round. We've talked about everything that they need, and obviously in the first round for obvious reasons, but second round, we've talked about center as a priority for the second round. We've talked about corner as a priority for the second round. You got to add linebacker to this class. Maybe the second round, Dan, I know it'd be great to have that trade with Minnesota, that if it ends up playing out that you get 11 and 23, that'll solve a lot of problems. But maybe this is the pick where the Chargers trade back and acquire a little bit more draft capital to supplant some of the holes that they have and the needs that they need to fill.
Yeah, there's no way I'm pulling the trigger on a linebacker if I'm just sticking and picking the whole way through. Like, they just have too much they got to do. And so the only way that I'm doing this is if they add extra capital to where they can pick at least twice in the first or second round. Because you mentioned it, like corner, you said, offensive line, you said center, tackle could arguably be in there, depending on a trade back. Wide receiver, obviously. You said linebacker. Interior defensive line could be there. Tight end.
That's another one I didn't mention.
Like, there's so many positions that the team needs. And while there are a few that are like mission critical, like, if we're being honest, the mission critical positions that they got to effing do like ASAP.
Yes.
Wide receiver and corner. Those are the two ones by far.
100%.
Then after that, I'd argue is probably kind of in the same tier would be linebacker, probably offensive line in general. You can say those would probably be the two, honestly. But like, you could easily double dip at both corner and receiver. Running back is up there. Like, there's a bunch of like, you're basically fighting for like 2 picks with 5 positions.
It's tough
in the top 100. Like, it's
tough. And again, I won't try to. I mean, obviously, as you said, wide receiver, corner, those are your 2 top priorities. It stands right now. You obviously have to pick a center because there's nobody hiking the ball. I would not put any one of those 3 positions above.
You're forgetting
linebacker right now.
You're forgetting Bradley Bozeman.
I mean, true, but it's a 1-year deal.
Sure.
And you still need to draft a center long term. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of the same argument that I have as it relates to this linebacker position. You look at Dye and Perryman; those are 1-year deals.
Mm-hmm.
We know what Nick Niemann is. He's a core special teamer. He's not someone that you're going to say, here, take the reins.
You're not going to rely on him to
Minter's
be your starting
defense.
linebacker.
Yes. So I feel like having this chess piece, where with obviously what we've learned from listening to Jesse Minter, people obviously familiar with Michigan, and how important linebackers are in his scheme, like, you have to believe that they're coming out of this draft with one of them to round out that group in general, but to say, hey, this is going to be someone that I'm going to insert into this defense and how we are going to scheme up defensively.
Yeah. So, look, linebacker is a need that I think Chargers fans aren't giving enough focus. They did get Denzel Perryman. They have Deion Henley, who I think could be a very good coverage linebacker. That's a lot of risk, if you ask me. That's a lot of stock you're putting into a linebacker who's 32, who has gone through injuries and doesn't start all 17 games ever in Denzel Perryman, and essentially a second redshirt rookie in Deion Henley. Troy Dye, who's a special teamer who, maybe by sheer lack of anyone above him could be a starter. And Nick Neiman. You can't pretend that you're okay with that. You just can't. So our list, while different at the top of the top 5, the 3 we had at the end, 1, 2, 3, were the same.
4, actually.
That's right.
Top 4 were the same. Yes.
You're right. So Edgerrin Cooper, Payton Wilson,
Junior Colson,
Cedric Gray. Those are our 4. And to me, honestly, like after the 4, in my opinion, like that's where like that precipitous drop occurs. And depending on if they trade back or not, that's where you might be able to, or might have to choose your linebacker wisely.
Yep.
Anything else, Jake, before we get out of here?
No, this was a very unique list to put together. Again, we did this of what would fit the Chargers' needs best given what their current linebacker position has, what it's lacking, how they're going to fill that, especially with Jesse Minter as the defensive coordinator. But feel free to tell Dan and I how we were wrong. That's the beautiful part about draft season, because everybody has their different perspectives on each one of these players. That's what makes for really good scuttlebutt and discussion. It's what we're here for, obviously. So feel free to tell us where Dan and I were wrong. Feel free to also put your list of your linebackers that you're really high on in the chat. Appreciate it. Dan, first draft prospect list in the books.
And apologies, honestly, I felt a little rusty.
Honestly, I'm glad that we got the linebacker one out of the way first because it was tougher than you thought.
Honestly, that was a lot tougher than I thought. I think we both thought like the top 3. I think where we were
not a strong long linebacker class, but still, it did not make it any easier.
I'm not gonna lie, but Jake and I were going through this. We're like, all right, we're gonna do top 10, and Jake's like, we'll do 10. Like, are you gonna get to 10? We're both like, we'll see.
Again, if this was just overall linebackers, it would have been a lot easier to get there. But in terms of making it fits and finding guys that are good in coverage, in terms of good in coverage, this linebacker class didn't have many in that circumstance, which made it tough.
Yes. Cool. Well, that's going to do it for Jake Hefner. You can find him at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. We are fresh into the rankings, best fits for the Los Angeles Chargers. We'll have another one for you guys here soon. But until then, we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.